Hi, this is Kelly Wise, Massage Therapy World, and I'm with Annie LaCroix from the Columbia River Institute of Massage in Wenatchee, Washington. And
Hello.
Annie is also the first vice president of the Washington chapter of the American Massage Therapy Association.
Yes.
Hi, Annie.
Hello, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
So we were talking online the other day, and the topic came up of flipped classrooms, and that you use a flipped classroom in your school. So that begs the question: what is a flipped classroom?
And that's a great question. A flipped classroom is basically taking the conventional model of having a lecture during class and homework at night and flipping it around and having the lecture like at night or at home and then the homework during class as a group activity. So basically what I do is I pre-record lectures or snippets of lecture or whatever I want them to pay attention to. And then the next time they come to class, they work together on a group project to sort of enhance the learning of whatever that topic was.
Okay. So what made you decide to try something like flipped classroom?
Well, there were a few reasons, and I will say before I get too much further into it, is that I'm not completely flipped. I'm in the process of flipping my classroom, and I flipped quite a bit of it, but it's quite a lot of work. And also with a massage school, you can't ever completely flip it, and we can talk about that later. But what made me decide to do it is the research around flipped classrooms and learning outcomes is phenomenal. There's a lot of research that shows that it's really great when the students work together as a group in the classroom setting where the teacher can ask questions and kind of see how they're learning. And so I wanted to try it out. I liked the concept of it. I love group projects. I think they work really well in class, and a flipped classroom model helped me get both of those things, a little higher learning outcome and a little bit more time in class working as a group.
Okay. What kind of classes work best as in the flipped classroom format?
Business works really well. Again, I'm talking about massage. So business classes work well, ethics classes work well, anatomy and physiology is what I've started with, and that works really, really well. It's probably my favorite one to flip so far just because I've spent more of my time doing that.
Mhm.
Body work, you can't flip, obviously. That's too hard to flip, and that's about the only one that you really can't do, although you still could flip some of the concepts ahead of time. You could still have them watch some things ahead of time and then come in and get on the tables and do body work as a class. So
Okay. So you talked a lot about student outcomes. What kind of outcomes are you seeing with having used the flipped classroom?
I see higher test scores. But the other thing I see that I think is more valuable to me is I see longer learning retention where they really get the concept. So rather than memorizing what the teacher said, conventionally, like in my classroom, I would lecture for 3.5 hours with breaks in the morning. So we're lecturing about the endocrine system for 3.5 hours. And typically students memorize what the teacher said they should memorize. And then they go home and they study what they think the teacher told them to study. What I'm seeing is that by doing it with a flipped classroom model is that they actually retain it and understand it in a way that will add to their critical thinking down the road when they need to answer a question that maybe they haven't memorized the answer to.
So what do you think helps with that? I mean, is it just the fact that they're hearing the lecture first, or is it the group activities later on, or is it a combination?
I think it's a little bit of a combination. First of all, if I give them a pre-recorded video, and they're not as long as my normal lectures. By the way, I don't give them a 3.5 hour lecture to watch. That would be torturous. But I give them a short snippet, and in a recorded format, they can watch it as fast or as slow as they want. They can rewind it, they can replay it, so it gives them the ability to absorb it as they want. And then and when they come into the classroom and they work together, what they're essentially doing is teaching each other. And we look at, when you look at reading something, writing something, listening to something, the greatest retention of something occurs when you teach something. So essentially, by having students come together in the classroom and teach one another, supervised by me, who knows if they're teaching it correctly or not, they just have a better learning outcome.
Okay. So that's obviously a big benefit to the student. Now, how long have you been doing the flipped classroom?
I'm on my second cycle of doing it. So my second class essentially, and this third time I'll do it even more. But I've done it for about a year and a half now, and it's worked quite well. I haven't flipped as much as I've wanted to because I will be honest that there's a lot more prep that goes into. I shouldn't say there's more prep. There's a lot of prep in all curriculum
Yeah.
development, but when you do a flipped classroom, you have to be so far ahead because they need to get the material way ahead. They need to process it. You need to make sure that the material that you put in the snippet that you're giving them is sufficient. And so it really needs to be planned out a little bit more. And so I've just tackled a few at a time, but that's about how long I've been doing it.
Okay. So at least, I mean, if somebody were thinking of doing flipped classrooms in their school, the fact that they don't actually have to do everything all at once, right? They can just sort of phase it in a lecture
Yeah.
at a time.
Yeah, and I can speak to that directly because I'm someone that I'm like, I'm going to do a flipped classroom. I'll start tomorrow, 100%. I'll flip everything. Okay, that doesn't work. So the nice thing about the flipped classroom is you can even just take one class, one actual day of a class and say, I'm going to see how this looks flipped. You can make it its own activity. And that's a great way to get your feet wet and kind of see how the flipped classroom model looks to you. There are a lot of resources online for people that are listening that might say, what's the flipped classroom? What is that? You can Google it. You can look up a ton of stuff about flipped classroom. It's pretty accessible,
Hmm.
and you can look at a lot of ways to do it. But it does take a little bit of work, so it's nice to just think, I'll take one class and flip that.
Yeah. Okay. So, what kind of benefit is it for you, the instructor?
Well, I think the benefit for me, the instructor, is that my students do perform better, and I feel like the goal obviously my goal is not for them to memorize something for a test and then forget it. My goal is for them to learn something permanently.
Hmm.
Put it into their long-term uh, memory and retain that knowledge. So the benefit for me as a teacher is I feel that I put out better graduates with it. I feel that I put out graduates that understand what they're doing, not just to take a state test, but to really learn something. If you're asking me about short-term benefits for me as a teacher, I think there are a few. One is it does make me pre-plan a little bit more. You always have to pre-plan as a
Yeah.
teacher. You can't get away from that, but it does make me manage my time a little bit better for sure. And then on top of that, I really get to see what they're learning. I get to hear them say out of their mouths what they're learning. And then I can know, oh, they're not getting that. And it helps me to intercept a little bit sooner if there's a student that's lagging behind or a student that's not getting it. So I think those are probably the two or three major benefits that I see.
Okay. Um, since it's fairly new, you probably have a lot of data, but do you get a lot of pushback from the students for having to do the pre-work or for having to go and watch videos online?
I get a little pushback because believe it or not, there are still people that don't have internet access or say they don't have internet access or whatever. But I just remind people that you can go to a library, you can go to a lot of places and get access to a free computer. And I've also made that I don't technically have a computer at the school that is for the students only, but I have let some of them use my computer if they really can't get access elsewhere. So I get a little bit of pushback just in terms of like, I guess being forced to use technology,
Yeah.
but I don't get pushback in terms of actually doing the work because I remind them you're going to do homework either way. You're either, in this case, you're doing it on the front end. You're still going to, if I did it normally, you do it on the back end. I do educate my students. I tell them what I'm doing. I say, this is a new model. It's not super new, but it's relatively new. This is a new model. I'm doing a flipped classroom. This is what that means. This is what it looks like. So they're kind of invested in the challenge of trying it. So they don't mind doing the work, but the technology part is a little bit of a glitch.
Oh, yeah. And it can always be a pain and when you least expect it.
Yeah. It
Um,
has made me consider though, just in terms of which is maybe a good note for other teachers, it has made me consider requiring an iPad or a laptop or something. Many colleges do that anyway.
Yeah.
And so, and I've never done that, um, trying to be budget conscious and whatnot for the students, but I have thought really about the, including an iPad in your required textbook
Hmm.
or something like that. So I haven't made a decision on that, but it would be a good consideration.
Oh yeah. Um, so having taught some of these classes before, where you just get up and lecture for 4 hours, from a student enjoyment standpoint, for that 3.5 hours, much higher.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that students love to listen to me for 3.5 hours, and if they could
Sure.
listen to me for 8.5 hours, they would. Of course, we know that. But the fact is that it's easier on them. That's just a long time. My classes are 8:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, so I have a long class day.
Hmm.
And even though there are breaks and stuff, it's just too long. It's just hard on them, and I can see their eyeballs glaze over as their brains fill up. So when they're participating in a group activity, that time goes by much faster. They get to be a little bit more interactive. So I definitely think it's an easier day on them for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I like I said, I think for you, like what you said, just being able to walk around the room and see
Right.
who's understanding what,
Yeah.
is as an instructor, is a lot more pleasant than just standing up and talking for 4 hours.
I do think their enjoyment is higher. I do think it's better for them to be able to work together. It also really instills a sense of teamwork with a group of students. Now, I have very small classes. I don't take more than 8 in a
Hmm.
class. And so for me, I love it because this group of 8 just comes together and they learn to work together really well, which I think is beneficial.
Hmm.
In addition to education, I think it's beneficial to learn to work as a group.
Yeah. Well, since you do it on such a small scale, do you think it would scale up to, say, class sizes of 20 students?
I think it would be just fine. I think when you had the group activity in class, depending on what you were doing for the group activity, you just might have breakout groups. That's no big deal. But I think it would scale up to just about any size group quite easily. I mean, the more people you have, but this is with any learning style, the more chances you have that someone didn't do their homework.
Yeah.
And that works itself out like it works itself out with normal homework. So it's not really any different in that
So,
respect.
so what happens when, say, a student doesn't do the pre-work?
It's very obvious. And it usually I found that it usually solves itself. I do like that part of it too, where I'm not checking homework and saying, you didn't do your homework, where it sort of is self evident that they didn't do their homework. They are in class, they can't participate. The other classmates are like, man, you didn't read it, or you didn't listen, or you didn't do whatever. And so that goes away pretty quickly in the sense that they fix it right away,
Okay.
which is nice.
Cool. So what does it take to get started in this? I mean, because you're kind of a pioneer in the massage realm of doing this.
Well, and one thing you and I have talked about before is I will put together a few resources just because I think that would be helpful. But to get started, I would research it a little bit. And I also would just say, bite off just a little chunk. Don't feel like now I'm going to be at home making videos all the time. Don't worry about that. Just bite off a little chunk and just even take one class day and attempt it with one lecture. The way I started it with the way I teach anatomy and physiology is teaching it by the system. I took one system at a time and flipped that. So I would teach my regular systems conventionally, and then I would take or some, I'm sorry, not my regular system. I teach some of the systems conventionally, and then teach a couple systems flipped. And that was a great way for me to start and see how I liked it. And I certainly am glad I didn't do the whole thing at once because I make changes all the time to how I'm doing it. You can videotape yourself too long and make the lectures too long,
Hmm.
and it's very hard to figure out what you are going to take out of a chapter and put in a video. So I would say just try a little bit and see how it goes.
Okay. So, what have you learned in this process? Like you said, you've made some changes as you go along.
Oh, you know, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot just about how I teach and how my style needs to change to fit this style,
Hmm.
but also how a lot of this style works with my teaching. And I really enjoy watching the students teach one another. And I like to be able to supervise it. It gives me a better insight. I think what I've learned the most is that I have more insight to my students than I did before. So I think that's an important goal. I mean, all of us as teachers, our goal is to always get better, and by get better, I mean teach our students better, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want to do. And so I feel like this makes me a better teacher in terms of the students being able to learn more, especially at the accelerated rate in which a massage school operates.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always tell the students it's like drinking from a fire hose. You know?
It's, right, right. And this, this is just almost like it's almost like taking that fire hose, and they have the ability to rewind it a few times. Where if it's just a lecture, whatever they didn't take in, they've missed.
Yeah.
So,
Plus, if they're starting to glaze over at the end of hour two or hour three, it doesn't do them any good for you to keep talking.
right,
Um,
right.
so, I mean, it sounds like it would work really well for a regular massage school. But what about, say, for doing continuing education? Um,
I think it's great. I think it could really be beneficial because I know in the continuing education classes that I've taught, always a little bit of time is dedicated to kind of this overview. And so I know, depending on the class I teach, and you've probably had the same experience, is okay, I've got a set amount of time. I've got a 6 hour CE class or a 8 hour CE class. And so I need to do the overview. It's important, but I really don't want to take it away from the time of the meat of what the CE is about. So you could do sort of a hybrid flipped where you could give them the overview to look at ahead of time. And then when they start in the morning, just hit the ground running. Now, of course, if they don't watch it, you can't do anything about that. But I don't worry about that too much. So I think in a lot of ways, almost a hybrid flipped classroom model would work the best for CE classes.
sure. So even for the CE classes that are, say, more technique or hands-on based, do you think that they could make any use of some of the pre-work?
Sure. I mean, if you're doing hands-on and you need a little review of some of the muscles, or you need a little review of maybe some pathologies or some injuries or whatever it might be that you need to remind people of, I think it could be useful. So it would just depend on the class. I'm just trying to think of different examples, but there's almost always a reason why you need people to just, if they haven't been in school for a long time, they're just doing CEs to just kind of get them back into, remember you did learn this a long time ago. So,
Well, yeah, and and reviewing the muscles, there's most of the classes I've been to will do that,
right.
and so it's kind of nice to know ahead of time.
Hmm.
Some of us
Hmm.
forget the names of some of them after many, many years of being out of school.
Definitely. And in that respect, it can be beneficial for a student who is a little bit nervous about going to a CE class because maybe they haven't reviewed their muscles. They know then that they're not going to be put on the spot the next day because they can review them before the class.
Yep.
So I think that's nice.
Well, great. So any other things you want to say about flipped classrooms?
No, but keep watching. I'm going to do more and more. I hope to come back and tell you about my progress in the flipped classroom model.
Oh, that'd be great. Plus, we did talk about, in very short future, you'll provide me with some links and some resources and stuff so that
Yeah.
people can take a look for themselves. Um,
Um,
I I appreciate your time, Annie. That was wonderful, and I'm going to give the flipped classroom try on my thing try
oh,
myself. So
just let me know how it does. And by the way, if you when you post this, if anybody has any questions about it, they could submit the questions and I could address them the next time we talk.
perfect.